Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And here is a new set of videos we're going to be doing about the characters from Dragonlance. Namely, we're going to be doing this about the Chronicles characters. Now, we kind of did a set of Gold Moon videos a while back, so I think we talked enough about her at length in live stream and video format, because we've gone into love interests and whatnot. We might still occasionally continue those fanfics, but I figured we should perhaps do a video about the characters as they are. Not weird fanfiction schlock and whatnot, but the actual characters. And we're also going to leave this as an unedited, raw video with all tangents and rants and side thoughts kept in, because we often edit those out. And this will be effectively a exploration of the character and all of our thoughts, as long as we can go for, about the aforementioned character. The one we're going to start off with is Tanis Half-Elven. Now, we're going to stick to Dragons of Autumn Twilight so that we analyze Tanis in each of the three novels in his fullness. And we might even do this for Soulforge, because Tanis really should have a separate video during Soulforge, because that's a much younger Tanis. Well, not much younger, but like, he seems much younger, even though he's not much younger. Now, at the start, Tanis is the leader of the Heroes of the Lance. He's a guy who steps into leadership pretty naturally, and very obviously misses Laurana. Now that we've done a full book club podcast of Dragons of Autumn Twilight, I think we're in a safe position to judge him and discuss him at full length. I still maintain a fairly unreliable narrator, and that's because I prefer to read novels from the point of view that you occasionally need to question what the narrator tells you. And there are times when the narrator doesn't lie to you, but there are times when you should still question, no matter what. Tanis is such a character that one should question every act he does and everything he tells us, the audience, because there are times when what he tells us is something that contradicts other books, lore. So Tanis should be called into question on that one. That being said, he is a very intelligent man. That much is obvious when one reads Dragons of Autumn Twilight. He's not an idiot. He's actually a really good leader, all things considered. The only part where his leadership fails is in how he treats Raceland. The very best of leaders know how not to treat someone and how to maintain loyalty. This is a lesson that Tanis doesn't really know when it comes to Raceland. And throughout the story, he verbally abuses Raceland, roundly threatens him, or at least hints to Raceland that he's not fond of him, and looks the other way as several characters threaten Raceland. And we're not going to really discuss much more of the Raceland stuff, because otherwise it becomes a Raceland video. But at this time, Tanis was a man at war with himself. Inflamed by passion for both Laurana and Kitsiara, he is divided and is quite insecure, in doubt, full of himself. He honestly just wants to catch a break. And like all people, he doesn't catch one. Because nobody ever catches a break for reals in life. Unless you go and become a monk or something. And even then, I wonder. Or you go off into the Arizona desert and become one of those guys living in an ambulance or a bus I've seen. But even they look like they don't really get a break from life. So life is struggle. And this is something that Tanis really hates. Not going to blame him, because it's not something anybody really likes. That being said, Tanis is a very stalwart person at his core. His principal relationships are with Flint and, to an extent, with Tass. These are the two heroes of the Lance he best... he clings to the most, I should say. He does kind of get along with Sturm, but the difference is there are times when Tanis finds Sturm difficult to love. But Tanis doesn't realize it. But here's the thing that's revealed in Dragons of Winter Night. Sturm finds himself hard to love. Sturm is a man who doesn't feel any peace with himself or any self-affection. And this is aging Sturm faster than it should. That being said, when the adventure starts, Tanis immediately becomes smitten with Riverwind and Goldmoon to an extent. And I do mean smitten to an extent because he tolerates behavior and obnoxiousness from Riverwind that he never would from Sturm or Raceland or Caramond. Had Raceland or Sturm behaved the way Riverwind sometimes did, Tanis would have stuck a sword in their guts. I'm just being honest. The thing is, the half-man comment, there's no way Sturm or Raceland or even Gilthanas could have gotten away with that. Because that is a massive insult that Riverwind threw his way. And it's one that Tanis, of course, takes. And kudos to Tanis to an extent for taking the insult. Because he shows his character by not striking back to an extent.
He understands to a certain point that in a position of leadership...
Well, there it's because it's his, to an extent, his infatuation that gets the better of him. But underneath that, he at least behaves maturely in the moment.
Because if a leader would react every time an insult is flown his way...
Which Tanis does.
Yeah, true.
Except from Riverwind.
Fair point.
So, Tanis' leadership is decent, but there are problems with it. But deep down, Tanis does have compassion. And he does have a sense of loyalty, for the most part. At least in Dragons of Autumn Twilight. He doesn't want his companions to die. This is why he takes early leadership and rushes to get them to the boats and try to keep them out of harm's way. Once on the boat and across the sea, or the pond, I should say, there's the Tass and Flint scene of one being, well, there's the dragon thing, or the fake dragon thing. That was hilarious. That's my favorite funny scene in all of Dragonlance history. Well, after maybe the Gully Dwarves and some of the minor Kender scenes, but that's Kender for you. They're just so much fun.
Whimsical.
Yep. But Tanis, it's interesting that he's able to bring the team together. I don't think there's anyone in modern fantasy who could have probably done as good a job. And I stress modern. Now, I'm kind of dividing fantasy between the early fantasy period of the likes of Lewis and Alexander, and the later period from the 80s and onwards. Tolkien and Howard are decidedly not fantasy, they're mythology. So making that clear distinction, I think only maybe Gwydion might have been able to rally the companions as well. Perhaps better than Tanis to an extent. Tanis, not enough credit gets given to him for what he manages to do in Dragons of Autumn Twilight. That being said, Tanis does make a few mistakes along the way, as we've stressed. But when the time comes to follow Sturm through Darkenwood, he does. Now, the decision to stray off the path was not wise. But wisdom is not a virtue many of the companions have. And foresight is also not one of them. And I do stress these flaws in these characters because, let's be honest, they do frequently lack wisdom and foresight. Now, I'm not saying that to bash them. I'm saying that with a bit of a laugh because Darkenwood should not have gone down the way it did. That was a disaster. And disasters are what the companions deal in. That being said, they are essentially the Delta Squad of fantasy to an extent. The only thing is, you get some incidents which blow up in their faces to an extent. See the Draconian scene, which, of course, the Magirs and Tanis pull through and save the day on, which nearly ended up in everyone's deaths because Riverwind and Goldmoon ended up mucking up that time. And when they really shouldn't have. Sturm was pulling all the information out of the Draconians, all without too much difficulty. And that's the thing. Like, not everything happens smoothly with the companions in Dragons of Autumn Twilight. That's something I actually like about Dragons of Autumn Twilight. They don't have all the answers. It's not... Well, the heroes don't always pull it off without a hitch. There's always a problem. Something always goes wrong. And this is something that is very, very remarkable in their ability to think on the fly and recover. And that's something I do really like about them.
Tanis is also leading a group of very strong...
skilled heroes.
Strong personalities, sometimes conflicting with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, sometimes these personal conflicts causes trouble.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's doubt that ends up getting from the different heroes. Like, for example, Flint likes to put doubt in everyone about Raceland and whatnot. And Tanis has to juggle all of them in order to bring them forward to fight...
Verminard in this book and his forces. That said, you have Flint, whom it's hinted throughout this book is not in the best health. And Tanis refuses to see that. Because he's in denial that his father figure is dying. And the thing is, it's not that Flint's condition is beyond the pall, but it is pretty bad for Flint. Flint's still got something there, but he's definitely going to need to pretty much retire, but that doesn't happen in Winter Night. That said, when it comes time to flee to Qualinesti after running into Gilthanas and getting captured, Tanis is pretty reluctant and shaken up about the whole thing because his family life's not exactly great and it's on full display. And, it means dealing with an idiot like Porthios. Honestly, Porthios is just the sort of leader you pray to the heavens you never have to deal with. That being said, Seems like it's a pretty frequent occurrence in history.
You're talking about disastrous family life with the companions. That seems to be the norm with them.
To an extent. Not all of them have that. Tass has, I think, a pretty good family life.
Oh, well, that's Tass.
Yeah, he's the most functional. Raceland and Caramon kind of used to have a decent family life to an extent. When you consider the fact that their family life was just each other.
And they had Kitiara.
No. It was just them for a time. Kitiara was not a factor for a while.
I'm just saying that Kitiara is a...
Yeah. I know she's the problem. I'm just saying when it was just the Major twins, things were not bad. She's just the problem.
Yes, those two were functional for a long time.
Up until the test. But
yeah,
that said, Tanis, well, one could almost call him family with them. Sometimes she'd run off on her own, even when she was dating Tanis. But the main factor you got to bear in mind as we read in Soulforge, she's not living with the twins. She's living in her own place, pretty much downtown. And Tanis sees them more often than Kitiara did when she was dating Tanis. So in that regard, it was those three, and it was a much more functional family life than when she was around. So Tanis was a figure to an extent of stability for the twins. The only problem is his girlfriend wasn't great. But that said, Laurana quickly thinks it's time to resume the relationship, which Tanis is not keen on. Now, this is where we learn Tanis, in the backstory to Dragons of Autumn Twilight, had been kind of leading Laurana on, kind of. This is a complicated, messy issue, but he does try to deal with it like a man. And here we get into how Gilthanas at least says, well, we can at least rebuild the relationship. We can at least have respect between us as men. Which, according to some fans, means Gilthanas must die. And he's scum because he wants to start up the bromance again. Oh, the scandal, the horror. Sorry for the sardonic humor. It's just, I find Gilthanas gets too much flack.
I agree with you.
Now, he's gruff. There are times when he's not right when it comes to Tanis. He isn't in the right. On the other hand, Tanis is not always in the right. Tanis agrees to the suicide mission that Gilthanas was keen to continue. Solostrin sees it as, well, yeah, Gilthanas is going. Well, that's a bummer. Good riddance to Tanis and his group. Yeah, I don't like Solostrin. But the thing about Tanis as a character is that he can't just let Gilthanas go off on his own. Solostrin doesn't mind ordering his own son to die or on a suicide mission. It doesn't really affect him too much. It's a bummer, but he'll get over it. That's how it's treated. That's the nature of Solostrin as a person. Tanis, on the other hand, though him and Gilthanas are not entirely on the best speaking terms, can he honestly let Gilthanas march off on a suicide mission? No. And that gets to the core of Tanis in Dragons of Autumn Twilight. He is a very loyal person. Just as he cannot leave Riverwind and Goldmoon to fetch the discs of Mishikal on their own. He can't let them die to the Draconian army. He cannot abandon Sturm when Sturm is running through the woods towards the unicorn. He cannot just abandon some of the refugees of Qualinesti. He cannot... Not Qualinesti. Solus. He cannot just abandon Gilthanas. And later he cannot abandon the refugees that are in Pax Tharkas. At the core there, and it's also why he can't quite get over Kitiara, I think, because there's a very loyal side to him towards even Kitiara. And that's the thing that's the worst thing Kitiara did to Tanis. She slipped in under his skin and managed to capture his loyalty. And the thing is, Tanis, while he is an unreliable narrator with Raceland, And while he makes mistakes, especially towards the end of Winter Night and for the early part of Spring Dawning, for the most part, Tanis Half-Elven, Tantalos, is a very loyal character. And he's a very... I'm even going to go as far as to say he's a likable character. He's a very likable one.
One thing that I liked is that when they went into those caves to infiltrate it, Gilthanas, yes, went off on his own. And
Tanis ended up grilling even Gilthanas. He grilled Eben, he grilled Raistlin, and he grilled Gilthanas. And it was Lorana who said, leave him alone.
But the fact that the topic of, who's the spy? Eben wanted to blame Gilthanas.
Continuously.
But Tanis was like, no, he's not a spy.
Oh, that was before then. Before Gilthanas went off on his own. Yeah, you're right. He did end up early on going, the 3 humans against the elf. Which, that's what it was. It was a matter of Caramon, Sturm, and Eben seeing it as it's humans against elves here. And Tanis reacted with instinctive dislike for that very idea. Because, although he... Like I said, I think the dislike for Raistlin is a personal thing. But on the other hand, deep down, does Tanis have much bigotry in him? Not really. There is a little, but not too much. The thing is, Tanis is, like I said, a loyal guy. And it's a matter that his childhood loyalties stay strong in him. That said, he does later grill Gilthanas, because Gilthanas is pretty darn... He's acting pretty darn suspicious. The trouble is that Eben ran off on his own because he's got to report to Pyros because he's evil. Raistlin disappeared who knows where. It's not exactly clear. Part of me suspects that maybe Raistlin was following Eben.
It's something he would do.
Yeah. And not tell anyone. But on the other hand, you had Gilthanas, who was following Raistlin. What I like to think is that Raistlin was following Eben. So you had Eben going off on his own, Raistlin following Eben, and Gilthanas following Raistlin. But the thing is, Gilthanas ends up saying, well, I was following the mage. And this is where we get Raistlin just saying, you know what? This is where Tanis and everyone's kind of semi-abuse of Raistlin comes out at the end of Autumn Twilight, where Raistlin just says, you're not going to believe me anyway, so what do I... Like, if you're going to kill me, just kill me already. I'm done with this. I'm not even going to defend myself. You've already made up your minds, and you're just going to judge me. Screw you. I'm going to sleep. And he stomps off, goes off to a corner, and lies down. Well, yeah, like... That's the truth of it. Raistlin's a weird kind of semi-trickster character. He's very truthful in a lot of ways. The thing is, Tanis is not entirely sure about the Raistlin thing. On the other hand, when the time comes to fight to free the refugees, he decides, okay, since we can't really tell who the traitor is, there is a way. You could just need to suspect Eben because he's pretty darn suspicious. He decides we'll just give everyone a job to do and we'll deal with the situation as we can. Okay, fine. I don't think that's good leadership. I don't think that's sound leadership. But Tanis does the decision he thinks best to keep the party united. Because to turn on... I don't think deep down Tanis can turn on Gilthanas. To turn on Raistlin would rally most of the team, but would probably alienate Caramon, and Caramon could... Well, Caramon physically could take down the entire team. He's the best fighter. Like, I may really love Sturm, but let's be honest, Caramon would slaughter the rest of the team in a heartbeat. If it meant shielding Raistlin here. And so, the trouble is, that said, Eben would alienate probably Caramon, Tika, of course, and Sturm, and maybe Flint. So, and maybe Lorana. So what you have there is a semi-impossible situation. deep down, I think Tanis, I'm pretty sure he knew that on some level that, and it's later quoted that he had suspicions about Eben, but the entire team would rebel. They'd mutiny. If he accuses Gilthanas, that's where Lorana, probably Flint, they wouldn't agree to it. So he's in a situation where he can't really accuse anyone. Everybody's going to mutiny if he accuses someone, so he can't. Now, a sound leader would find a way to give the traitor enough rope to hang himself, rally the team against a traitor, and whatnot. That's what Gwydion would probably do from Prydain, from what you've told me. But the thing is, Aragorn would probably be able to make the accusation and get away with it, because he's charismatic. And we get there to the core of the problem. Tanis can be a likable guy, but he's not charismatic. He does not have the charisma that moves nations. And I really love Tanis as a character, but he's ultimately a leader who relies more on personal friendships and on cunning to help bind his team together, rather than almost animal magnetism or personal magnetism. For example, Conan and Aragorn can get away with making an accusation against, say, Eben without alienating any member of the team. The reason being that they are just simply charismatic individuals. Merry, out of the hobbits, was kind of the leader alongside Frodo to an extent. Frodo has the wisdom and does have some personal charm enough to make an accusation of that sort, but Merry would ultimately rationalize everyone onto his side. He's so smart, and he does have that charm to an extent. Samwise and Pippin don't, for example. I'm going to make one weird argument from what I've seen. I don't think Taran has the kind of charisma to be able to get away with such an accusation. Neither does maybe Cole or Fluter or Elanwi. As far as fantasy goes, some of my favorite characters, like Orphan from the Orphan anime, no way could he get away with such an accusation. He's not charismatic enough. Let's just be honest. Tanis falls more into that kind of fantasy character. He's more like Taran or Orphan rather than Gwydion, Aragorn, or Conan. He can't just make such an accusation so easily. There are some characters who can, because they're so charismatic and charming. Now, that said, there's a certain type of fantasy character who doesn't fully have the charisma per se exactly, but could probably get away with it. And I'm referring to Solomon Kane, for example. But Solomon Kane just has an air of danger, and I think in Japanese literature it would be called killing intent. That people would just go, I'm not going to screw with that guy. I'm getting out of his way. If he says it's Eben, it's Eben. We throw him off. We throw the lamb before the wolves, and we let the wolf devour. And it's just that Solomon Kane's a certain type of character. But let's say Cull. He's charismatic, I think, enough to make the accusation. Same with Brol. Well, Brol is a bit like Solomon Kane in some ways. But my mentality is some characters, like Tanis, don't have the cheat sheet, or the cheat that is personal charisma. Personal charisma is a very useful tool. Some people have it, some people don't. For example, Indie Geek is a very charming guy. I do not have his personal charm. I do not have it. So I have to get through life without that kind of charm that just makes everyone fall in love with him and just makes everyone adore him, even those who don't want to adore him. I'm going to say that. I'm not in the category of people who don't want to. I actually freely adore Robert and really adore him. Like, the dude is awesome. I'm just saying I can see that he's very charming. Our oldest brother is a fairly charismatic individual. Far more than Dan and I. I'm just being honest, Dan. Our oldest brother is very charismatic. Even our dad could be pretty charismatic. Our brother gets it from him and our grandmother. But we did not inherit that. And Tanis is someone who is in the situation of not having personal charisma. But what he has is the quality of being a very reasonable guy, like, say, Merry to an extent from Lord of the Rings, and being able to typically rationalize with people or yell at them and browbeat them. I'm just joking. But he's typically able to get by off of the situation. That is to say, the situation is such that they have to rely on someone. He's reliable, so they turn to him. It's the difference of Joe Keto from Digimon and Tai Kamiya. Tai Kamiya is charismatic. Joe Keto is far from it. But what Joe has is reliability. That is to say, a mixture of wisdom, which is the ability to think with your heart and your head at the same time. Personal reliability, so people think, well, I can count on him. He's not brilliant, but he's reliable. And smart, because, well, Joe Keto is very, very, very smart in the Digimon series. So Tanis is like that. He's just overall reliable. And I hope people don't mind this slight tangent I went on, because Tanis has a certain quality about him that's hard to define, and I think the best word is reliability.
He doesn't have the best hand, he has sometimes Taff, which is flaky. He has Lorana whining in his ear. He doesn't have the what he should have to deal with the problem, but he
makes the best of it.
Exactly.
Like, he has Flint, who's always complaining. He has Lorana, who's typically whining. He has Tass, who's pretty flaky, and he's like that. He's a Kender. You have Sturm, who's always brooding. You have Raceland, he's Raceland. You have Caramon. Oh, actually, Caramon's pretty rock solid, actually. You have Riverwind, who is prejudiced against everyone. And you have Goldmoon, who... No, actually, Goldmoon's pretty reliable, actually.
She once said it...
Her and Caramon are just trying to help, so never mind. You have Gilthanis, who's basically got every mad skill under the sun. Except Gilthanis tends to be whiny as well. So, like, he's French. Yeah, you don't have the best hand there. And
then you have Eben that's constantly saying, he's the traitor, she's the traitor, he's the traitor.
Well, yeah. Oh, and you also have Tika, who's who's a damsel. So, actually, okay, Tika kind of does distract Caramon sometimes. You got Tika, who's just in every love triangle imaginable. I'm joking. But the point is, Tanis does not have the best hand, but he makes lemonade out of lemons. He does it while yelling and complaining and raging at people, but he still does it. So he deserves a lot of credit. And at the end of the novel, Raceland tells him to look at the situation as it is, not optimistically, just look at it as it is. Stop looking at it from a glass half full or half empty. It is the way it is. Let's look at the glass and just accept the situation and keep marching forward. We need to be pragmatic about the current problem. That is to say, we have an all-conquering dragon army that is divided into multiple sections and that is intent on conquering Ansalon. And we don't have reliable leaders. We do not have a great hero like Huma Dragonbane. This is the situation. Now, let's try to... What do we do? What do we make of this situation? How should we respond? And Raceland doesn't exactly have an immediate answer. And Tanis starts brooding, but it is also very thematic that Tanis chooses Raceland's company in that moment over the celebrating crowds who would prefer that for a day they ignore the problem. Now, where this wedding feast was a mistake and actually proves to be a problem is that the refugees and several of the companions carry this mentality forward. By the beginning of Winter Night, they take the attitude, well, burying our heads in the sand worked for a day, so we got to keep doing that. We have to keep burying our heads into the dirt and pretend that there's no problem. We're winning the war. Even though beating Verminard was pretty much a fluke. He all but tripped and broke his neck. He didn't, but, for all intents and purposes. As to the dragon, it basically did the same thing. They got lucky. They were immensely lucky. Luck may not favor them the next time. And as it turns out, it doesn't. It really doesn't. But that's the thing. They'll need to make sacrifices for victories. They'll need to make some hard decisions. And it's Tanis who, at the end of Autumn Twilight, is realizing the scope of the problem. And kudos to him, because the others look at this big problem and don't even want to they don't want to properly acknowledge it. It is Raistlin and Tanis who take a hard look at the situation and say, okay, how do we deal with it? Now, this is not to say that Tanis gets, black-pilled. Neither does Raistlin. They're just simply taking a more gray pill, I think it would be. I hate these pill metaphors. But the thing is, I think that they're just looking at the situation as it is and saying, okay, so burying your head in the sand isn't going to help. How do we deal with it? And we don't even have a full image of the situation because of fog of war. And it's to Tanis' credit that he's willing to at least confront himself, confront the problem, and even admit that he doesn't really like leadership. Because so far, it's been a pretty crummy deal.
And it was tough leading a ragtag bunch of misfits, but now he has to lead essentially an entire
army of refugees.
He has to help lead nations.
Well, sort of, not really. That's what it's hinting at the end of Autumn Twilight, but he doesn't end up doing that. Kind of thankfully, although I would have liked to have seen Tanis cast in that role. It might have been interesting. But he doesn't have to do that. Tanis is, at the end of this book, well, he's going to have to lead some of the refugees. And these are refugees intent on, well, just making really stupid decisions. And yeah, gone are the reasonable women at the end of Dragons of Autumn Twilight who help lead the rebellion. Those who helped shepherd the children out of danger, because they don't really reappear. And yeah, if only some of the older women were in charge, because they obviously are better leaders than, well, the High Seekers Council, who are all just imbeciles. Tanis, now, a hanging plot thread at the end of Autumn Twilight is that he's still caught up in his love triangle, because, we need at least a drama plot going forward. But Tanis tries to kind of compartmentalize. He tries, doesn't always succeed, and he's in a weird situation like Qui-Gon Jinn in a few novels, where he doesn't know how best to guide Laurana. And he is a bit in a mentor position, because he's wiser than her and more traveled and more matured than her. So he doesn't know how best to guide his Padawan learner, but especially given the feelings between them. And that also further adds to some of the division between him and Gilthanas, because, so it's a messy affair. And it is well written to a large extent between those three in regards to Autumn Twilight. And you have, of course, Tanis's other relationships are mostly peaceful, except for occasionally Sturm, where the two get into loud yelling matches. Sturm typically takes it, but a few times Sturm pretty much tells off Tanis, which is pretty funny. And usually about the subject of Raistlin. As for Raceland, it's a very abusive relationship in a way because, on the one hand, Tanis will defend Raceland against some of the others and take Raceland's side sometimes. But, on the other hand, he's a bit of a jerk to Raceland's face. And one factor is that he does sometimes play the others against Raceland a little. And in that regard, he plays politics to an extent, in a way that Gandalf, Aragorn, they never would. That said, Raceland doesn't always help his own case, because he does have a way of rubbing off the wrong way on people. On the other hand, and Raceland can be sarcastic, distant, and cold.
He can be as charismatic as a rock to the faith.
Yeah. Although, for the downtrodden, Raceland is incredibly charismatic. It's a matter that if you stick Raceland with Quasimodo would die for Raceland and would probably love him more than Esmeralda. But if you stick Raceland with, let's say, let me think. Well, the companions, it doesn't go so well. So Raceland is really kind of misplaced as far as novels go. And it's a really interesting relationship. But Tanis, as a leader, he's actually well positioned. He's in the right novel. The trouble is, Tanis would rather be in a Jane Austen novel because that's a far easier living than this war. But that said, I hope you guys don't mind this little discussion. We're thinking of kind of doing this for each character across the trilogy, because the characters do get character development, and to discuss the character development and the character arc and the character themselves, throughout each novel. And I think it is good and important to put them in perspective. And it's important to bear in mind the backstory. For example, Tanis has his massive abandonment issues and rejection issues from his family who have, you have Celestrin and Porthos. That's going to mess up anyone's head. And then you've got the back and forth on-off relationship between him and his two girlfriends. You've got, and I do say two girlfriends, you've got his weird hot-tempered relationship with sometimes Sturm, and more often Raceland. You've got, on top of that, the fate of the world on his shoulders, and he's not the best equipped guy for it. But for the hand he's given, as Dan has pointed out, he does a magnificent job throughout Autumn Twilight. Now, the next Tanis discussion will be about him in Winter Night, where we'll see how well he does in there. But that's not what the next video is going to be about. The next video, hopefully, will be the opening chapters of Dragons of Winter Night. And then maybe we'll do a Dragons of Autumn Twilight Gold Moon video, or maybe a Riverwind video. Might be good to put those two characters in perspective. Either that or Tass. But we'll see what we feel like and what people want. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Theros smashing the Dragonlances into shape.